Okay, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to our series with Sanat-o-Tijarat on various aspects of business. Today we'll have a very interesting conversation as well with the legal and the accounting profession, but we'll start with Tilawat by Murabi Matiullah Joyasa.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولا تجعل يدك مغلولة إلى عنقك ولا تبسطها كل البسط فتقعد ملوما محسورا. إن ربك يبسط الرزق لمن يشاء ويقدر إنه كان بعباده خبيرا بصيرا. I seek refuge in Allah from Satan the accursed in the name of Allah, the gracious and merciful. And keep not thy hand chained to thy neck, nor stretch it out an entire stretching, lest thou sit down blamed and exhausted. Surely thy Lord enlarges his provisions for whom he pleases, and straightens it for whom he pleases. Verily he knows and sees his servants full well. In these verses, Allah Ta'ala is presenting a principle of spending, whether it is spending on a personal level for personal needs or desires, or for our business, or even for our spiritual needs, is spending in the way of Allah. The principle set here is that one should not be miserly to a point where he does not spend anything, or nor one should spend extravagantly where one is left with regret and remorse. So the middle way is what Islam is teaching in this, and that's what we should all adopt to. Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah Murabi Saab. I wanted to share quickly before we go to the panel the purpose of Sanat Tijarat department. It's really to persuade members of the Jamaat to involve themselves more and more into industry and trade. And today's another way of sharing some ways to be more involved in industry and trade going forward. And wanted to share some of the resources we have available. If you'd like to go, I'd like to highlight the LinkedIn tab, Ahmadiyya.us// LinkedIn, where we have over 1,000 members in there. It's an Ahmadi only forum. It's a private forum for you to be engaged. We also have our website, and on if you can register on Member 360 of the Jamaat platform, you can register your business there as well, and we'll have a member directory available there. You can look through some of the other items. Yet, I would really encourage you to think about how you can do more intra-Ahmadi commerce in your dealings. We've talked about this many times, and we are measuring this at the chapter level as well. So if anyone would like to get business or give business to other Ahmadis, please let us know, and we can help facilitate that. And every chapter has a local secretary you can speak to in this regard. Jazakallah for everyone joining, particularly Naib Amir Saab, Lal Rana Saab's on as well. And now I will turn it over to Nuruddin Mahmood Ahmed Saib, who will lead this discussion and panel.
The Assalamu Action Secretary Saab, Jazakallah for your introduction and for holding this important webinar. This evening, I am joined by two esteemed panelists who will help us through this discussion. Lubna Malik Sahiba, who is a practicing lawyer, and Zia Anas Sahab, who is a certified public accountant. Let me now go over to them to briefly introduce themselves to set the table for the discussion. Lubna Saiba, if you would please start.
Jazakallah, Mahmood Bhai. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Livna Malik. I am a member of the North Virginia Jamaat. A little bit about myself. I practice corporate law with a focus on public company governance and securities and capital markets. I have been practicing for a little over 15 years, and I currently work in-house at General Motors Company. I completed my bachelor's degree from Princeton University and law school from the University of Chicago. I also serve as vice chair of the International Ahmadiyya Muslim Lawyers Association, and I live in the Washington, D.C. metro area with my husband and 3 young children. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. Zia Sahab, you next, please.
Thank you, Mahmood Sahib. It's an honor to be here today and really looking forward to the conversation. My name is Zia Anas, and I'm a certified public accountant in the state of New Jersey, and I was licensed in 2010, I believe, so I've been practicing for past 15, 16 years. Have the opportunity to work for big 4 accounting firms and many bigger corporations in real estate and financial services, specifically in investment banking and insurance over the past 15 years of my career. Currently, I'm residing in San Diego for the past 3 years. I've spent 20 plus years in North New Jersey Jamaat. Happily married with 2 kids, and they're all here in San Diego.
Jazakallah. And just maybe a little bit about myself. I'm also, like Lubna Saiba, a lawyer by training and practice law. I used to be in what they call big law, like Lubna Saiba, and now with a multinational company as a regional general counsel. This evening, I'll be serving as your facilitator / moderator. With that, just to get into it, I'm supposed to remind everyone that please use the Q&A button to submit questions, and we'll then save time for questions at the end. But please put them in there so that you don't forget, so we have a healthy body of questions to work from. With that said, perhaps Luna Saiba, I will start with you. Given the topic of this evening, you said you've been practicing now for about 15 years across different disciplines. What's a legal mistake that you've seen that only really becomes apparent after a business becomes successful? Something that doesn't look like maybe it matters on day one, but down the line could really have a very adverse consequence.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a big part of my role is trying to make sure that we paper and prepare various transactions and documents so that these problems don't happen down the road. And I think one of the most common and potentially ruinous mistakes that I've seen is a failure to properly document and assign intellectual property, which shorthand we refer to as IP. And, in the beginning, when you're kind of at the founding or beginning stage of starting a business, it might seem like the code that you've written or something like that, it's very exciting that you have something new. And it's very easy for us to forget that we need to protect this unique form of intellectual property, because that is really where the value is. And what can often happen is that when one starts as a small business owner, they don't think about it, and then their business continues to grow. And then as their business continues to grow, and they might seek investments from outside investors or venture capital firms or whatever it is, they need to see that that particular unique aspect of whatever it is that your business is offering is properly legally protected. Otherwise, anyone can really use it, and you don't have the rights to really make that unique set of IP profitable and turn it into something that can really create a lot of revenue to gain the interest of additional investors, and even to protect it yourself, that someone else doesn't take your idea, improve it slightly, or have slightly better marketing and then go run with it, and you're left with nothing. So I think probably the proper protection and registration of intellectual property.
Jazakallah. I think that's such an excellent point, right? I mean, I think as a practical matter, it's really a lot of, let's say, complex legal topics are really about common sense, right? Applying common sense in a vigorous way. And in this instance, it's, what am I really trying to advance through this company? What's really valuable about it? And then once you know what's valuable about it, and oftentimes it is intellectual property, right? Then how do I make sure that from the perspective of someone who actually wants to invest in my company, I've protected that thing in a way that isn't compromised, right? And that's where your point about IP is so critical. And I mean, this is something that I think those of us, particularly who serve businesses, we see this all the time, right? Is the importance of clean IP and protecting IP, because ultimately it is one of the most important things that really drives any enterprise. Ziasab, if I could come to you now, kind of the mirror image, right? So what's a tax mistake that, seems harmless in the beginning, but could really become very extremely expensive down the road?
It's a really good question, right? So one thing that immediately comes to mind, a mistake which in many cases it's most deceptively harmless tax mistake in the beginning, and it's the wrong corporate structure, right? And what I mean by that is you can create a sole proprietorship or a single member LLC as an example, right? Not that it's a wrong structure, but in many cases we have seen that people starting their small business along those lines and not realizing that they're staying that way for way too long. Now, what it does to them, it results in 15.3% of self-employment tax on part of their profits up to a certain dollar amount, right? They lose the ability to split their salary and distribution and ultimately find themselves in a weird kind of tax trap. They use Schedule C for their reporting purposes, and what that does, it really raises your chances of getting audited by the IRS, right? And down the road, if you're looking for an investor to spin off part of your business, that becomes a little bit of challenge because your bookkeeping and your record keeping is not as straightforward as it should be. There are many other technical reasons, but I would say getting the corporate structure wrong, it sounds easy in the beginning. Your margins are thin, your cash flow is tight, so you might be enticed to go towards a sole proprietor or single member LLC, not realizing what's coming your way down the road. So we see that quite often.
And if I can just add briefly to Ziasab, I totally agree. That definitely is a big concern. And from a legal standpoint, if someone pursues a sole proprietorship, they don't have any liability protection against liability. So if they are sued for any reason, their business is sued, something happens, all of the personal assets of the person who has that sole proprietorship are on the line and available for anybody to try to go after in court. Their home, their savings, in some cases, even the assets of their spouse. So there's a lot of risk involved there.
Yeah. So Lubna, maybe building on that, so you're just starting out a business, right? Obviously, dollars are inherently tight. But if you had to rank the top 3 legal documents, right, that every founder, entrepreneur who's starting a new enterprise should create before even making their first dollar, right? So spending the dollars that you maybe don't have, right, before you actually make a dollar. What would those 3 be and why?
Yeah, excellent question. So I would say that the top 3 documents would be your operating agreement, which regardless of what type of corporation or setup you're doing, you will need some type of operating agreement or bylaws and that is really the constitution of your company and how it's going to run and kind of the general rules it's going to follow. Depending on how you're going to actually do your work as a small business, it may be a good idea to have an independent contractor template because there may be a lot of different types of people that you're going to be working with. And you want to make sure that you have a proper agreement in place as to how those various engagements are going to work. So having a template that you can then modify as needed for different folks that you might be interacting with. And finally, going back to the very first point, having some type of IP assignment and confidentiality agreement. So whether it's you yourself as the business owner developing any IP or anything unique, or somebody that you have hired to work for you that's developing something unique, you want to make sure that that IP is staying with the company and that it doesn't disappear. So I think those are probably the core things, with, of course, the operating agreement being the most important.
Jazakallah. I've been asked to remind attendees that if you have questions, and please do submit questions, to use the Q&A button on Zoom. And that way, once we are done with this part of the discussion, we can turn to your questions. Jazakallah. Ziasa, coming back to you, could you talk about, people obviously get into this, right? And they think, okay, this is what I need to do. They might have some understandings based on word of mouth or other things. But oftentimes as a professional, then you come in, right? And you see some things that maybe haven't gone correctly. So what's something that founders, think might save them in taxes, but actually, to the point you made earlier, makes them a target for an audit?
Yeah, again, a great question, right? So I'll start with a general answer and then I'll become a little bit more specific. So the single most dangerous category, I would say, is any strategy that looks for artificially inflating your expenses or reducing your income, right? And ultimately, people have this in mind that if I reduce my income by hook or crook or increase my expenses by any mean, that will help me save taxes, right? An example of that could be just expense padding, we call it, right? Just increasing your expenses when they're not legitimate, right? Or not taking reasonable salary if you are an S corp structure and there's a requirement of the IRS, and people do that because they don't want to pay self-employment taxes. They would rather take distributions, which is exempt from the self-employment taxes, or having fake contractors on your book, or misclassifying your W-2 employees as contractors because you do not want to contribute for their Social Security or FICA portion, or in general, having aggressive depreciation strategies with no substantiation. So all these type of things, they sound very, I would say, enticing in the beginning, where one can say, I can increase my expenses or I can reduce my income, not report a 1099, but they significantly increase your chances of audit.
Jazakallah. Yeah, I think, again, going back to the point about a lot of this is more straightforward than people might think, right? Obviously coming back to the anchor for all of us here, we're talking about professionals who are interested in starting businesses, people who already have established businesses. But at the end of the day, as Ahmadi Muslims, honest dealing, straightforward dealing is really the anchor for all of us, right? And I think, where people really can go very wrong, unfortunately, whether it's in legal matters or tax matters, is when they think that, in those areas, dishonesty is acceptable, right? And that's when what comes back, unfortunately, right, to bite you, in this life and the next, right? As it turns out, the IRS catches you here, and that's the least of it, right? So in reality, if you are in doubt, that's when you engage a professional, right? To say, hey, obviously I want to be honest, but maybe there is an opportunity I'm missing here while being honest, as opposed to your point, falling for that trap of, hey, is there something that I can just not report, or something that I can inflate, to make myself look better from a tax perspective. And that doesn't really require a CPA degree, but as a CPA, you've seen it, right? And so you could come back and give us your experiences and educate us as to why it really is fraught with peril. Lubna Saiba, give us an example of a contract clause, because obviously, businesses run on contracts, right? Or they should anyway. If they don't, that's another problem, right? But what is a common contract clause that you see that founders ignore, but then later on wish that they hadn't?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there's probably two things that I would mention. One is not exactly a clause, but more understanding how these legal entities work. Merely setting up an LLC is not enough to simply provide liability protection, making sure not to commingle personal assets, personal signatures, signing as an individual for various agreements that a company may do in a person's individual capacity. All of these types of things can basically cause the liability shield of an LLC to be erased. So I think making sure to keep everything very distinct and separate, I think as a larger overarching matter, that's something that is often kind of left by the wayside by some folks who start small businesses. And then in terms of the common contract clause that I think that founders might ignore, especially when they're signing agreements with other third-party service providers and whatnot, are indemnification clauses in agreements that basically say, in plain English, it would be that if something goes wrong to another person, what you are obligated to pay for that other party. It could be covering all their legal fees. It could be covering any loss that they face. And it's usually in the boilerplate language towards the end of a contract. People will glaze over it. It's in a lot of legalese. They assume that those can't be negotiated, but they absolutely can be negotiated. So I think indemnification clauses are definitely a big point that people ignore. And then relatedly, choice of law. So there's a lot of states that have legal systems in place that are more friendly to companies, like Delaware, for example. New York is another one. And then there's states that are completely not friendly to companies at all. And so if your company gets sued for any reason, you would want to have a law that's getting applied that's actually more friendly, particularly with small businesses. If there's a specific industry that, you know, a small business is involved in, trying to keep that in mind, basically thinking of the worst situation that could happen and making sure that your agreements are protecting you for that worst situation.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, and I think the other thing, again, coming back to basics, right? So it also somewhat perhaps depends on what type of contract you have, right? So, you know, in my professional life, I have a team that negotiates contracts. And if we're negotiating a contract with a customer that you have versus maybe a supplier, right, that you would hire to do something for you, that also then, you know, varies the dynamics, right? And so to your earlier point, you know, you want to make sure you have the right clauses in place with the right stakeholders. And then, like you said, I mean, for example, if you have a supplier, you know, they're in a different state, you know, maybe even a different country, right? And then you got a work product that maybe isn't what you hoped for. Okay, well, how do you make sure that you get, you know, hold them accountable? To your point, if you know, have the ability to only have it recourse against them in a different country or somewhere else in the world, well, then that probably is something that you should understand up front, right? Is that that's going to be challenging, right? And you know, a big part of legal contracts, frankly speaking, also is you can't always mitigate every risk. But if you can't mitigate that, then the question becomes, how do you price it in, right? How do you have other ways that you mitigate the risk? You shouldn't assume that you are going to be able to go enforce the contract somewhere in a different country, but then maybe you have other ways, right, that you can ensure that you've mitigated that risk. But you shouldn't assume that you can do something like that without first really doing your diligence. Ziasab, coming back to you, if a founder wants to maximize their tax advantages, is there a structure or a strategy they should consider from day one?
It's an interesting question. Right now, there's no single quote unquote perfect structure for any founder, right? It varies based on what your short-term goals are, what your long-term goals are. For example, you can use an S corp to reduce your self-employment. If you expect to raise venture capital down the road, you should start as a C corp to take advantage of the qualified small business stock qualification You can start an LLC, which is easier to get going and easier to convert into partnership or to S corp later on, has less admin cost. So it's hard to say. It's not a one size fit all. It's more sort of dependent on your goals, your objectives, what you're trying to attain, what sort of business are you in, the size of the business, the industry are you in. But depending on the situation, we're happy to talk to folks and we advise them, we send them in one direction. So yeah, I would say just discuss your needs with your trusted CPA, your accountant, or whoever your advisor is to help you or to allow them to guide you to the right direction.
Jazakallah. So maybe at this point, if we can, I'll have a few more questions for both of you, but in the interest of making this a little bit more interactive, we go into fielding some of the excellent questions that have been coming in over the chat. So there are some, somewhat technical ones, which I know obviously, we're not here today to give any specific, let's say, legal or tax advice, right? If you, that's probably a helpful disclaimer for everyone, right? We're here to kind of give you general advice. But that being said, there are some good questions here, and maybe I'll start with some of the more kind of in the weeds but very practical stuff, right? So there are a number of questions in here that touch on basically the type of entity incorporation, right? And I think there's an interest, for example, in when is it appropriate to set up an S corp and how should that be done? Maybe that's something that you could touch on.
Yeah, of course, happy to. Look, I think it's a numbers game, right? So when you're starting small, S corp comes with an administrative cost, right? So now if you're not a single member LLC and you have elected for S corp, you have to file your taxes separately. You have a payroll running requirement, so you have to pay someone to process your payroll on a defined or periodic basis. Year-end accounting, year-end taxation, so it all adds up, right? So it depends where are you in your venture, and there's a break-even point. I would refrain myself from giving a number out, but generally there is a calculation that your accountant can do. And if you're just starting, you can start with a simple structure, but as you see profits coming in, you may want to elect for the S corp. Now, the period for election is the first 75 days when the calendar year starts. You can file for a late election, but you will have a really good idea once you have your business up and running where you are stacking from the numbers perspective. And at that time, you can have conversation with your accountant to flip the switch and do that conversion to S corp.
Jazakallah. Lubna Saiba, coming to you, there's some questions around, I'll call them kind of IP questions, right? So, there's one question about, when should we protect, right? I think the person actually wrote patent, which is maybe a helpful teaching moment in terms of the distinction between different kinds of IP, right? But when should we protect our company name, logo? When is the right moment to do that? And how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, excellent question. So I would say as soon as you have decided on a name or logo, that is the time to start to begin the process. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, they go by the policy of first to use. So the first person or entity to use a particular name or logo in commerce is usually the one that gets the benefit of that trademark on that name. Patent typically will refer to it's a more technical term to refer to a type of invention, but with what you're talking about, company name or logo, that's more trademarking. And the USPTO on their website, they have instructions on exactly how to go about registering. I'm not an IP attorney myself, so I don't have greater insight into that. But definitely navigating to the USPTO website and making sure that the name that you're thinking of is not already in use, and then going through the various stages to actually register. Also, it may be worth it to look for local IP counsel wherever you live to assist with your registration if it is more complicated or you're not sure how to navigate the process. It's usually a pretty fixed window of work that would have to be done to actually file the application. And it's money definitely well spent so that there's no situation down the line where somebody else may be using your same name or logo, and the litigation that could ensue from that would be much more expensive.
Jazakallah. Zia Saab, there's a gentleman who is sharing a little bit about their own experience, right? They've been renting out a property without any significant problems for years. But based on your insights, they're thinking, maybe this is the time to establish an LLC. Can you speak a little bit about, when does it make sense to establish an LLC? What kind of benefits does it provide? How does it compare to other structures?
It's a great question again. Look, Sister Lubna touched upon it in the beginning of this webinar. LLC in case of a rental is really restricting your liability, right? God forbid you have someone who trips and falls in front of your property and comes after you. Yes, you have insurances that might come into play and cover some of that. But LLC is really ring fencing, right? As long as your expenses are not commingled and everything is staying within that LLC, the income is separated from your personal income and your expenses are sort of kept within an account or a credit card, whether it's a bank account or whatever you're using. So LLC is giving you that sort of liability protection, right? Now, if you're not an investor or you're not a real estate professional, then for tax reporting purposes, you're still going to file a schedule called Schedule E, whether it's under your personal name or under an LLC name. Now, if you are a real estate professional, then it's a different story. Then there's some other things that come into play. So to emphasize and to summarize, I think LLC is a good idea if you're worried about the liability, right? If you have one property and your concern is again to protect that for the long run. But if your status changes, you buy many properties and you become, like I said, professional, you're spending 800 plus hours on that real estate venture, then you can start thinking about maybe a different sort of structure for the business.
Jazakallah. There's a really interesting question in
I believe Mahmoud Saab froze for a second. Zia Saab and Sister Lubna, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
While Mahmoud Saab comes back, can we go back to the more elementary element of all these structures, sole proprietor, partnerships, all these different structures on just the definition one more time, just to slow down just a little bit?
Yeah, I'm happy
Yeah.
to. Sister Lubna, go
No,
ahead.
Ziasab, please, especially because, very little of this is actually a legal distinction. Much more of it has to do with the tax designations that people choose, because as Ziasab knows, you can choose multiple different types of legal entities and elect very similar tax treatment. So, Ziasab, please.
Look, so sole proprietor is essentially, we're saying that we're not an incorporated business, right? We're not an LLC or we're not a C Corp. So it's someone who's doing a business and they're essentially doing it under their social security, right? So Sister Lubna again touched upon this. It's the liability that is not protected in that case, and something happens, whether a customer gets damaged or a property damage or what have you, that can cause a bit of a trouble. From tax perspective, you will file something which is called Schedule C. So that's sole proprietor. Now, if you move on to LLC, if you're a single member, then for tax purpose, you are still filing a Schedule C, but now you have a cover on your business.
Can you just spell out what LLC stands for? just for
Limited
some of us?
liability, yes, yes, it's a great question. Limited liability company, right? So it limits the way it says it literally limits your liability to the venture you are running under that limited liability company, right? Now, if you have more than one individual part of that LLC, then for tax purposes, that becomes a partnership. So you file a different tax return. It's called Form 1065 instead of a Schedule C on your Form 1040. So if I carry on, now you can also form something called C corporation. And with that, it's taxed as at the entity level. It's generally not a desired structure because there's a factor of double taxation in it. So you pay taxes at the corporation level, and then when owners take dividends, they pay taxes at their personal return. So, but again, it's a corporation which limits your liability. You can have shareholders, you can add shareholders without any restrictions, sell your share, get new individuals in. Code election for S corporation, a small corporation, which is suitable for entities who are not going beyond 100 owners, 100 column. There's some restrictions there. You cannot have foreign partners there. S corporations, they are a little desirable because you can process a reasonable salary as a small business and then take most of the money out as a distribution, which is not subject to self-employment taxes. You file this form called 1120S for the S corporations. So I mean, I can go in more detail, but hopefully that clarifies.
Yeah, that's helpful. So, Sister Lubna, Mahmoud Saab's back. Mahmoud Saab, can I just ask one more question since we jumped in? Sister Lubna, a lot of complexity comes with if I'm doing business on my own and I want to have a partner. How do you do a partnership agreement? How do you decide who gets how many shares? Is that all, is it just as simple as 50-50? And when you go 50-50, how do you make a decision if it's two of you? What are the pitfalls and how should you structure a partnership when you have others involved and they're not family or if they are family?
Yeah, absolutely. And whether family or not, the Islamic guidance is that we should definitely write out and have all of these types of arrangements in writing. So, not only from an Islamic perspective, but also from a legal perspective, these are agreements and understandings that should definitely be documented in writing and should be very transparently communicated amongst all parties. Um, in terms of the partnership agreement, or if it's an LLC and you have multiple members, and I know there were many questions about if you could have a single member LLC, you absolutely can have a single member LLC. But if you have multiple members, then you would typically document this in an operating agreement. And there's a couple of different ways that you would think about um, how somebody's ownership percentage would typically be set. So, capital contributions are a very common way that partners or members would determine what percentage each of them actually owns. So, this is the initial cash or equity that each partner actually contributes. Um, and it's not just the profits, but also making sure that loss is allocated for in your operating agreement. In terms of decision-making authority, you want to avoid paralysis where everything is 50-50 and then you just have a problem. So if it are in fact only two people there, then it may be that one person is responsible for signing certain types of contracts and another is responsible for signing a certain type of contract. It could be that up to a certain dollar threshold, either partner is able to enter into agreements on behalf of the business, but for anything above a certain threshold, there may be a higher level of agreement that's required. Having more detailed descriptions of the role, time commitment, expected contribution of each of the partners or members is also really crucial, especially if you're in a situation where you're now at a point where a partner has to be terminated or a member has to be removed for cause. You want to have it very clearly delineated what would actually trigger that if you need somebody to be exited from the business. And then also having a buy, sell, exit provision, right of first refusal, you might hear it referred to as that sometimes. Having something set up in there. So if somebody does want to leave, what are they supposed to do with their shares or their percentage ownership? So the more things that can be noted in the agreement itself, the much easier it will be. But people will often be in a position where they have a really good friend or a really good relative and they have a great idea and they want to get into it and they don't think about this. It's like starting a marriage but thinking about all of the things that could go wrong and trying to plan for them on day zero. But having that in place actually makes the business run a lot smoother because everybody knows what their lanes are and they're less likely to kind of venture outside. So yeah, there's a lot to there, but those are some of the big things to think about.
Zagala Magpie, do you want me to jump back in or?
Of course, this is it's please.
No. Jazakallah, and apologies for my technical difficulties. But I think, as I'm listening to you, I think that's a really important point, maybe to take it one level of abstraction up, right? Which is at the end of the day, and we see this, those of us who advise businesses all the time as well, right? Is that people think about these legal documents as quote unquote boilerplate or legalese, right? When in fact, it's the opposite, right? It's kind of what are those basic questions that really are going to be foundational to A, how you run the business, but then B, what happens if something goes wrong, right? And then answering those questions really is 90% of the work. And then the remaining 10% is putting that in a clear, documented way into an agreement. So, it's not something that you just kind of throw up and say, hey, this is my legalese. It's really, hey, how do I actually want to run this? And what would happen if something went wrong? How would I want things to be done? And then to your point, once you've answered those questions and they're clearly answered in a binding way, then it makes everything easier because people are no longer guessing, but instead everyone knows what the rules of the game are, and then can abide by them. And this is, of course, also something that was mandated upon us, right? By the Holy Quran and the Holy Prophet ﷺ in terms of having that clarity and having it in writing, right? Not proceeding with any verbal understandings, because that's really what can get you in trouble. Going back to some of the great questions that are coming in the chat, there was an interesting question that's, I guess, very timely. Somebody asked about, hey, can I use AI to draft my operating agreement, right? So what are your views about, AI, which I think, for all of us, right, it's a reality, right? But how do you think about that in reference to the discussion that we're having today?
Yeah, I think AI is advancing exponentially every single day, and to minimize it and think that it cannot be valuable, I think is the wrong choice to take. Even in-house at large corporations, we are pushing the use of AI in responsible ways. There are different forms of legal AI that exists out there that's more fine-tuned to preparing different types of legal agreements and can help. But I think the main failure people have when they use AI is just blindly relying on it and not considering for a moment if this is actually right. So things like standard boilerplate, indemnification clauses, notice provisions, basic reps and warranties, AI can do that as well as any boilerplate you might get from a lawyer. There's not going to be any difference there. But then there are it really depends a lot also on how you're informing AI. So for example, telling the AI what state you want your operating agreement to be prepared in accordance with, telling it what kind of company it is that you're actually trying to form, making sure you're giving the AI tool that you're using enough information to be able to build something out that's actually relevant to what it is that you're doing. And then once you have that, going through it with somebody or sharing it with a lawyer that, maybe you don't want them to draft it from scratch. Maybe you just want them to mark up a 10-page operating agreement that you played around with AI to kind of build out and work with your partners on to try to fine tune those types of things. It can also help give you some ideas about what types of risks you should be thinking about with the type of business that you're thinking about going in. Um, but I don't think anybody should blindly rely on something that's AI generated as checking all the boxes, but it can definitely be a very helpful starting point that might get you 75% of the way there.
Great. Ziasab?
I think Sister Lubna hit it right on the head. It's the AI tools and solutions are as good as the input you're providing to them, right? So one thing that caught my attention when Sister Lubna was talking about operating agreements, and she said, not only you want to define your capital contribution, but you also want to define your loss contribution, right? Who's going to get what type of loss? So it's important because you could have high net worth individual who wants to use more loss to offset some of the other income coming in. Now AI doesn't know all these different type of scenarios, right? So you really have to provide those specific sort of provisions or scenarios to AI to get to the point where you really want to be. So I 100% agree. I think it's the future. That's where everything is heading to. But you have to be careful on what you're getting out of it by providing those careful inputs.
Yeah, I think both of you make some excellent points there. I mean, at the end of the day, like you said, it's a tool like any other tool. It's a very powerful tool, but it requires all of us to engage with it critically, right? Which means we have to ask the right questions. We have to question what comes out of it. Ask it to criticize itself, right? That can also work, right? But really, like you said, not rely on it, but instead use it as an aid, but ensure that you fully understand, what's coming out of it, and is it the right thing for you? And then, knowing when to engage someone, but maybe it can help, right, to get you faster to a place and save you time and potentially money, right? And that's, I think, to Lubna Saiba's point. That's how we also use it now in large corporations, right? As an enabler, as an accelerator of work that we're already doing. There's a few questions that have come up that I think I would summarize as: what's the right stable of professionals that you should have around you as a new starting business, and when is the right time to engage them, right? So lawyers, tax professionals. One person asked, at what point do we hire someone to do our taxes for us rather than figuring it ourselves? Is there a minimum profit per year we should keep in mind? So maybe Ziasab, you can start. What are your thoughts on that question?
It's a good question, and again, I would say it depends on how risk averse you are and what's your appetite. Right now, our first question was on what people get wrong in general, and I feel what they get wrong is the structure to begin with. Before you start, I would say get someone in your corner, ask them these questions. Yes, it may cost you a little bit, but it will help you. It will set you up to be successful in it, right? So I would say whenever you're thinking about a venture, if you're not professional in that specific field, raise your hand and find someone who can guide you through.
Lubna Saiba, on your end, what would you say on that question?
I think I probably agree with Ziasab. I don't know that it's particularly helpful to necessarily have like a lawyer who you have on retainer. There's not going to be that level of issues that you're going to need advice on right in the beginning. It's really just making sure that you have that initial structure correct from the beginning, and it's probably honestly more strategy that you're going to need internally, making sure that you have that starting structure that's correct, that you're doing the taxes correct, that you understand which assets you need to keep separately. But beyond that, it's much more focused on the operational nature of the business as opposed to needing to have somebody who's there to protect you from the various risks. If you have the correct agreements in there up front, they will do 90% of the work of protecting you against the various risks that you'll face in the early stages of a small business.
Exactly. We've got a few minutes left. We've got a lot of people on, mashallah, 70 participants I'm showing on my screen. Perhaps there are also some questions that folks might want to ask live. So my understanding is that for that, if you do have a question, you can raise your hand and then the hosts here will call on you one by one. So if there are folks who have questions, please go ahead and raise your hand, and we can call on you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. We can
My
hear
name
you.
is Mohammed Aurangzeb. I have a quick question for you. So, if I have started an LLC and it is in its beginning stage and there are no profits yet, so do I still need to file taxes, or if there is no income, like zero income, then I don't have to, file the taxes?
Yeah, I can take that. It's a good question, right? So if it's a single member LLC, then you do want to file because you may have some admin costs associated with it that you can expense and write off some of your other income, for example, your W-2 or what have you. So you can offset that. Now, if you don't have any expenses and you don't have any income, then whether you file or not file, it's a single member LLC. It will not make any difference.
Right. Thank you very much. But if we have some expenses, then it is better to file and get some advantage of it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. Thank you very much. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. Any other questions? There we go. I think we have somebody. Fawzia Saiba.
Assalamu alaikum.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Yeah, please go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I don't have any question, but I just want to say I'm a tax specialist too. If I could help anybody or anyone, I will be more than happy to help.
Jazakallah. Well, thank you for being patient and listening to everyone. You have your own advice that you could give. I know that the department is definitely looking for professionals who can assist, right? And to National Secretary Saab's point earlier on, this is about intra-Ahmadi commerce as well, and so perhaps a good opportunity to facilitate that. That's excellent. Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum. So my name is Ataul Manan. I just want to check in one thing, that if you make an LLC, so like within LLC, if there are like two partners, so you really need to make a partnership within that LLC, or partnership could be like a separate structure.
I can take that. So look, from tax perspective, right? So if you have a multi-member LLC, it is gonna get taxed under a partnership structure. So that's from the tax perspective. But I'll pause here and maybe ask Sister Lubna if she wants to add something else from the legal perspective.
Yeah, there will still need to be a governing agreement, typically an operating agreement, not a partnership agreement if you're registered as an LLC. And in that context, it would be a multi-member operating agreement. So it would be because there's two or more members, and whatever the relative percentage of those members is, that can vary. It could be 70-30, it could be 50-50, it could be 51-49, whatever you and the other member agree on, but it would be a multi-member LLC. So that it wouldn't be you could refer to it informally as a partnership, but for legal purposes, it would be referred to as a multi-member LLC or limited liability company.
Jazakallah. I believe we have one more question coming up here. Raja Sahab.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
G, please go ahead.
Okay. I'm in real estate investments for a very long time, and very big thing is the liability insurance. And especially in Florida, where I am, the lawyers are very big in suing people. So any business you're getting into, just make sure you have a proper liability insurance, which is not really that expensive, but very good to have it. You don't want to start making money and then have a lawsuit will cost you too much. So that would be my 2 cents in it. Thank you.
Jazakallah. Yeah, that definitely something to consider We lawyers have a habit of being litigious, right? And so having some protection against those legal expenses can be wise. Again, depends on your specific context, but can definitely be a worthwhile investment. I believe we have time for perhaps one more question. Please go ahead.
Jazakallah, thank you very much. I have another question. So, question is that what could be the some good ways to get initial funding from, for example, Small Business Administration, or there could be some other places where we can get some seed funding. Can you kindly guide in this regard?
TSF, you want to start perhaps?
Yeah, sure, I can. Not necessarily a tax question, but you mentioned already there are SBA sources. They're out there, depending on if you need a working capital loan or if you need a loan to buy a machinery or a building. So SBA has different types of loan categories. Now they have these banks who work with SBA, and you can go to them. They'll ask you for a business plan. You can provide them your projection. You can provide them what your current status is, and they will underwrite your loan essentially, and they can extend you a line if they think through their underwriting process that they are open to take that risk. So that's one source. You can also go for personal loans, but again, that comes up with a high cost of interest associated with it. You can find an investor who is willing to put some money in return of a return again. So there are different things, but I guess like the more commonly used venue or avenue we have seen is essentially SBA.
Right. And do we need to have some kind of help on our side to file some application with SBA, or we can do it by ourselves? For example, if somebody is like only a technical person, can they still be able to file, or we need to take some help for that?
Yeah, look, the banks have their underwriting team, right? So they will ask you for the basic set of documents. So they will ask you for the financial statements. They may ask you for a projection, or they call it business plan, where tell them where you want to see this business go from here. So all those type of things. They may ask for your personal financial statements, which is essentially your net worth, your assets, your liabilities, and those are the type of things. If you're comfortable, they're all templated. You can again use AI to see how far you get along with that. But they can get technical a little bit. So I would recommend, if you are at a point where your file is stacked on someone's desk for funding, maybe engage someone and get professional help there.
Jazakallah. So I think we're running
up
just
against one thing.
Now.
I wanted to add and it's been growing a lot in the last couple of years, but there's also ways to pursue like equity crowdfunding, where there are non-institutional investors that will basically contribute very small amounts of money relatively to different types of small businesses to help people get started for a percentage ownership or return in that company. So that's also something that might be worth, popping into Gemini or ChatGPT to learn a little bit more about how that equity crowdfunding works. It's a very simple way to try to get some seed money for small businesses.
Jazakallah. So very briefly from each of you now, any closing thoughts for the group here before we hand things back? Lubna Saiba, perhaps if you have anything first.
Sure. Yeah. Jazakallah for the opportunity to chat with everyone today. This has been wonderful. The questions have been excellent, and they've been firing off throughout the hour, so it's gone by very quickly. Just high level, I think it's important for anyone who's seeking to start any type of small business that the Holy Prophet ﷺ taught us that honesty and trustworthiness are the true hallmarks of a true believer in the marketplace. So whatever the business may be that any of us are deciding to pursue, it is a trust from Allah, and we owe it to Allah Ta'ala and to ourselves to make sure that our professional reputation in the business space is one that you can proudly say that I'm an Ahmadi Muslim who has this business. I follow the rules. I pay the taxes, whatever it is. And then also just making sure that as Allah Ta'ala blesses the fruits of your labor in businesses to always make sure to give it back in the form of chanda and give it back in the cause of Allah so that the Jamaat can continue to progress and grow. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. Yes, sir.
I'll echo what Sister Lubna said, and I'll top it up by saying persistence is the key when you're starting a small business. So it could take you 2, 3, 4 years to get up and running. Be persistent, be honest with your dealings, and keep your eyes on the target, on the goal, and you will be successful. I've built a small business from ground up. So it could be a little bit of tough situation in the beginning, but it all works out at the end. So that's a little something I want to leave.
Jazakallah. Really, really wonderful thoughts, both from both of you. This has really been a privilege. So National Secretary Saab and the team, greatly appreciate you turning your attention to this topic and giving us the opportunity. Jazakallah from me as well.
Jazakallah, Nuruddin Mahmood Saib, Sister Lubna Malik Saiba, and Ziauna Saib. I really appreciate sharing this, and I'm sure everyone truly appreciated it. I know we're over time. Just one comment is as you build your business, as you go down this path, we ask that you keep other amities in mind. We want you to work with other amities as you grow your business, you build your business, as you ask for support for business, and do it in the rightly guided way as was mentioned by the panelists, but also keep turning the money within the community as well. Sometimes the Jewish community is referenced in terms of their ability to work within and support each other. Sometimes that comes with challenges. Sometimes that comes with taking a few extra steps. But what I've noticed in the U.S. Jamaat is that more and more people are doing it and doing it well and starting to figure out how to professionally work with other members of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. With that, we'll close since we're over time already. Mutsat, can you please lead us in dua to close the meeting?
Ji, Jazakallah. Please join me in dua. Ameen.
Jazakallah.